Buckeye Talk from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, and we had a lot of off-week conversations with Ohio State coaches about process today, and a lot of it about how you decide who plays and who doesn't, and how that works. And it came up partially because of a very specific instance against Michigan State. Josh Proctor has been starting, and Lathan Ransom started and played the bulk of the first-string snaps in that game. And Jim Knowles kind of went into the ins and outs of why that took place this week and whether it's going to be a long-term thing or whether it's just an example of an approach that they really have across the board to deciding who plays.
Yeah, he said that the competition between Lathan Ransom and Josh Proctor is week to week. And so I wanted to know what's the differences. Like, how do you end up picking who outside of just, who practiced better? Because that's coach speak to me. He said Lathan Ransom is a bandit safety who thinks like an adjuster safety, like Ronnie Hickman does. And so he can do he's obviously doing the bandit stuff because that's what the position he plays, but he can do a lot of the stuff that adjuster does too. And so maybe against a team like Michigan State where they were going to throw the ball around a little bit, you probably want Lathan Ransom out there because he's still got that kind of free safety mindset and not just being a strong safety. While with Josh Proctor, he's very good when you give him a specific assignment, which sounds like to me just let him go play fast, which works when you're playing against a team who just wants to run the ball because it's like go find the ball carrier and tackle him. But when you're playing an offense who wants to throw the ball around a little bit more, that probably doesn't work as much because he's probably out of position sometimes. So I am interested to see how that continues to develop. You know, who's the starter against Maryland when you know they're going to throw the ball versus who's the starter against Iowa where they might move the ball 2 inches the entire game.
The way Knowles talked about that, it reminded me a little bit of conversations we were having last year about the running back position, where it became sort of a hot hand conversation. Whoever had the better week of practice would maybe get more reps, or whoever was just the one that was getting it done in the game that day. That certainly happened in the season opener where Proctor missed a tackle earlier. They put in Ransom, and he just stayed out there. And there's a flexibility there that probably benefits Ohio State. I mean, you've talked before in the past, Doug, that make that emphasis between playing depth from strength versus playing depth from weakness. And this position is one where it feels like they really believe that they're playing depth from strength and trying to get the most out of both of those guys.
And Jim Knowles talked about being game ready, which is a phrase they've used before. And it's like, hey, maybe there's like 14 or 15 guys in the defense that we feel completely comfortable with. And then whatever the snaps are that week, like don't read too much into it. Player, family, fans. It just was kind of how it went, but we still believe in the guy, right? And so those kind of things, and specifically, you know, when he's talking about Proctor and Ransom, it's like, hey, like we can just make that decision. It's not that big of a deal because everybody knows they're both capable. But there are, and I think maybe the thing where it would apply a little bit differently is if they would decide to change the reps at cornerback, and we've seen J.K. Johnson play a little bit more in the midst of games, but would you decide to start J.K. Johnson when everybody's healthy ahead of Cam Brown and Denzel Burke? Or when Jordan Hancock gets back healthy, would you start him instead of Cam Brown and Denzel Burke? He said if you're making decisions like that, he didn't say those players' names, but to me it applies to that. That's when he said you've got to let the players know, the families know, everybody know when it's more of an obvious switch. And so I'm curious how they will handle that. Again, they'll get more corner reps this week, but I think that's the one position where maybe you would say maybe they would be better off with a new starter there and a somewhat drastic change in reps. And if they did do that, they would take that more seriously.
We're also always have our antenna up for what this team's going to look like next year, and safety is one place where the three guys who had been starting the most, McAllister, Proctor, Hickman, are all presumably gone next year. And the way Jim Knowles was talking today, I think you can almost probably ink in Lathan Ransom as the adjuster right now. That's the guy that they see as being the heir apparent to that Ronnie Hickman role. And there's a lot of things Ransom can do, but it's clear that Jim Knowles has a great affection for him. And it's a little bit different than some of the other guys because there were guys that he saw as soon as he came in January and was getting in the spring and was impressed with him. And Ransom was not that. Ransom was out of sight, out of mind. He knew he was this guy with a broken leg that would maybe factor in. And Ransom was the one who, with his progress, like later on, just became someone he couldn't ignore. And I think they're expecting huge things from him as soon as next year.
And then they're going to put Sonny Styles at Bandit and shoot him out of a cannon, right? Like that's also happening next year, is it not?
I would assume so, yeah. I would assume so.
That's an assumption by you?
Oh, yeah. Listen, if he's going to start every game going forward starting next season for the rest of his life at every level.
Yeah, which leads to an interesting conversation about some other guys on the depth chart, frankly, and where they might or might not fit in. So we'll probably have that conversation in the future on Buckeye Talk. Get that wherever you can find podcasts, and get the text 614-350-3315.